When the bombs went off in Moscow in 1999, the people behind it were very similar to the oligarchs who planted bombs in Bologna railway station in 1980. It was virtually exactly the same NATO game plan. We've got to stop the communists winning elections, so we've got to kill some ordinary people. Same in Russia, same in Italy.
Getting bigger by being better. The number one choice for Bristol. This is BCFM 93.2.
Anyway, we're going to talk space wars now, and our first clip is from this documentary just out from CNN, a very dramatic film, and it's called War in Space, the Next Battlefield. What they do there, Martin, is they give us an idea of what a cyberspace attack will be, crippling US satellites, that kind of thing.
As the sun sets and the nation goes to sleep, the battle for supremacy in space is about to begin. One final night before Americans wake up to a new and daunting reality. 10 a.m. New York, 7 a.m. Los Angeles. Cities normally buzzing with the morning rush suddenly stall. TV networks start to go dark. Internet connections run slow. ATMs begin to malfunction. There's confusion. No panic, not yet, as stealth cyber attacks are racing through the U.S. at the speed of light.
Then you have the question of, is it a cascading effect or not?
By noon in New York and 9 a.m. in Los Angeles, financial markets dependent on exact timing provided by GPS are frozen. Mobile phone services already patchy fail. Confusion gives way to growing fears this is much more than a simple cyber glitch. Many traffic lights and railroad signals, also timed by GPS, default to red, bringing transport to a standstill. Commercial air traffic is grounded as pilots lose navigation and weather data. Power stations and water treatment plants begin to stop functioning.
This feels like utter science fiction, and yet it's not.
Remoting track 1-2.
By now, Americans know the country is under some kind of attack.
This is Sivers. We are taking a space launch on a...
And they look to the armed forces to spring into action.
Stand by. Data building is low.
This is 0 on tag departure.
But the world's greatest military is struggling to respond.
Hotbox!
Military pilots and drones lose contact with the ground. GPS-guided smart bombs are rendered dumb. Warships lose contact with commanders. This is the nightmare scenario. Chaos on Earth as our adversaries launch a massive cyber attack on key infrastructure and disable and destroy our satellites in space. The first shots in the first space war.
Well, that was a clip there from the documentary War in Space, the Next Battlefield from CNN last month, and that gives you an idea of what they think it would be like. But there is another documentary from a couple of years ago which gives a completely different view to CNN, the official sort of prime-time mainstream TV view, and that documentary is called Pax Americana and the Weaponization of Space. It starts by looking at the origins of space war with the Nazis and the V2, taking what they call the ultimate high ground.
Space then has been called the ultimate high ground, and the advantage to the state that can seize and maintain the high ground is the same as holding the high ground throughout history, whether that was a hill, a mountain, or in the latter half of the 20th century, the airspace.
September 6, 1944. Armed with over a ton of high explosives, Germany's first tactical rocket, now called the V2, the vengeance weapon, is fired at London.
It was a clip there from the film Pax Americana and the Weaponization of Space.
Well, I mean, we know that this is going on. Both sides are engaged in it. The US openly called for full spectrum dominance in the Project for a New American Century document, and so on. Now, the
main person here we're talking about is Werner von Braun, and he was the right person who was right involved right at the very, very start over in the US.
Gentlemen, will you please take your seats so we can begin today's conference? I take a great deal of pleasure in presenting to you today as our guest speaker, Dr. Werner von Braun.
Gentlemen, the conquest of outer space is the greatest technological challenge of the age in which we live. On the right side of this picture, you see a large wheel-shaped space station. This, of course, offers tremendous possibilities to reconnaissance, and both in the civilian sense as in the military sense.
These Nazi scientists, these Nazi space scientists that came to this country under Project Paperclip, developed schemes to essentially control the Earth from space with space-based weapons.
It seems even feasible to use such a platform in space as a base for the bombing of objects on the ground. And it is my opinion that such bombing could be carried out with an unprecedented accuracy from such a station.
There's a voice of Werner von Braun there. Also, Space Command, that's the US command now that deals with space. They've got all their... it's basically like a new frontier, isn't it? What they do is they have drills now, and the astounding thing is that even though they're spending more and more money on space weapons, the threat is, in fact, diminishing.
I have a valid missile event. I agree, that's a valid event. You have 2 for track 0001.
Today's Air Force fights missile defense war games, in which so-called rogue nations attack American cities.
Possible impact in San Francisco, sir.
In reality, who would launch such attacks against the USA?
Platform is queued.
The interesting thing is that the threat is actually shrinking, not increasing. The ballistic missile threat is declining. There are far fewer ballistic missiles in the world now than there were 15 years ago. There are fewer countries with ballistic missile programs. There are fewer hostile countries to the United States with ballistic missile programs. When you look at it, it really comes down to a handful of states whose programs we worry about, North Korea and Iran, basically, and they only have medium-range missiles. That is, they can't reach the United States.
Of course, the fact of the matter is that this has now become an offensive program, certainly not a defensive one.
What America is doing is not about defense. It's about offense. It's about an aggressive military doctrine that talks about control and domination. I really went through an entire transformation. Everything that I knew was different. But one thing wasn't different. One thing always remained. I realized I had a good heart, even as a conservative, as a young follower of the military. I had a good heart. I had a good intention. And I realized that many people in the military are that way, that they have a good heart. They mean well. They're doing what they think is the right thing to do. They want to protect the country.
There are moments that will truly test the leader within you. Test whether you will take the hard path or the easy path, the wrong path or the right path.
Most people want to have a good heart, and that when you challenge them to think, it doesn't mean that they change overnight. I didn't change overnight. It took me some time behind those gates on that military base for me to make my change, but it's all about initiating that change.
The willingness always to take the right path, even if it's the hard path, is called character. In every aspect of your life, whether personal or professional, you must always maintain the courage of your convictions, your personal integrity.
We're living in a very, very dangerous time, and there's hardly any alarm in this area across the board. I mean, people are they're so inundated with so many things, just making a living, just getting through the day, just trying to remain sane in all this insanity that's going on. That it's hard to get their attention and saying, wait a minute, I know you think it's bad. I got news for you. It's a lot worse. People don't want to hear that, So we have to find a way to alert people to the reality of what's going on. And that's not an easy task.
Congratulations. May God watch over all of you and these United States.
Lord, we pray today that you would allow us to worship you in spirit and in truth.
as we go out into the world.
Well, that's the US military there kind of indoctrinating their people, Martin. But this is getting pretty much as if it's almost being rolled out last year, that is to say, well, this year really, in 2016, as the big thing to be worried about. There could be a massive cyber attack. You have to also remember, of course, we've got smart meters in many of our homes now. That could mean that a cyber attack can just completely knock out your electricity, your gas supply, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, the various spokesperson for the Americans have been saying, well, we ought to carry out cyber attacks on Russia to punish them for their cyber attacks on us. And, of course, it's there was an attack on the 5 top Russian banks a couple of weeks ago, which was thwarted by the Russian Post Office. This is very dangerous because, of course, the Russians are quite right to be paranoid that they're under attack. In 1983, we nearly had a nuclear war as bad as, every bit as bad as the Cuban Missile Crisis, but nobody even heard about it. And that was because Reagan and Thatcher at the time were being very belligerent, and they nearly provoked a nuclear war.
If there is a massive cyber attack on the West, how will we know who's done it?
We won't. And the obvious conclusion to draw is it's a false flag, because they will then roll out and say, and because of that, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, we're invading blah. That's what it'll be like.
How vulnerable are our ordinary homes, things like that?
Well, they're very vulnerable. I think what we saw in the fighting in Ukraine, where we saw some evidence of what the Russian military are capable of, the obvious thing for them to do is to knock out the electronics of the other side. And they've been training for that for years.
OK, folks, don't say we didn't warn you. Time to sign off for the West Murdoch News at 7 now. Coming up, Arabian Nights. Thanks to old Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers. Go to our show page for your comments and criticism this week, .org.uk. Dialects on Tuesday at noon, a Christmassy one. I'm on Twitter at Tony Gosling. Wishing you a relaxing and enjoyable Christmas. Do join us for the Politics Show at the same time next week. God bless, and don't let the banksters get you down.
The hour. Live from the Sky News Centre.
From the Sky News Centre at 7. The German leader's warning the country could face more terror attacks, but insists security is being stepped up. Angela Merkel's been responding to the death of Anis Amri, who was shot dead by police in Italy. He's suspected of driving a lorry into crowds at a Christmas market in Berlin and has links to extremists in Germany. But terrorism expert Chris Phillips says the country faces a big challenge.
They've got 7,000 people in Germany that they know of that are basically potential terrorists, and they certainly haven't got enough police officers to follow all those people.
Malta's Prime Minister says initial forensics show the weapons used in a hijacking of a